Well, I'm back at Rockport again to find some fish plates. Believe it or not, I'm actually happy right now, but I am happy in the angriest way possible. Let me explain. So after years of looking for armored fish plates at Rockport, not every day, but every time I'm out here, that's what I'm looking for, in addition to other things, but that's really, you know, if I could find that, boy, that's a tick off my bucket list. Well, at the end of the day, I saw that little weird blob in there. Didn't look like the photos you typically see of armored fish plates. Didn't look like the one that the student of mine found previously. But as I did editing for the video, I realized, oh my God, I think that's an armored fish plate. So I reached out to a friend of mine who's a professor of paleontology who's actually discovered some species at Rockport. And he said, well, I can't identify that conclusively without holding it, but it looks fishy. That's probably a fish plate. So here I am. I left it behind. I'm gonna find it. I'm gonna hammer on some more shales. Well, task one, find where I was working the other day. I think I can remember exactly where I was. I'm very fortunate that I have a mind that immediately maps out locations. Like, I go to a place once, and I've got a mental map of where everything is pretty well. You know. But I've been out here enough times that I should be able to find where I was at in this quarry. It wasn't too far beyond the entrance. Job two, try to find that rock I tossed away. Job three, crack some more shale and look for some more stuff. I think this is where I need to turn. Well, not what we're looking for, but isn't that a very nice bit of stromatoporoid with very well preserved layering? But not at all what we're looking for here. I don't think I was this close to the trail. This might be where I was at. This is a big old, come on now. This is a big old hunk of shale. This might have been where I was working. All right, after a few minutes, I did find it. In a 300-acre quarry, I found a specific rock that I left behind. There's the one that has the crinoid. It's also got some interesting other things in it. For example, what's going on with that? But here we go. This is the guy right here. And our suspected fish plate is right up here. Now it's a little bit less obvious now. It's gotten dried out. It doesn't stand out as much as it did when it was wet. But I'm gonna bring that home and get a better look at it. Well, as promised, here's the piece at home. Now this is a little bit that I was curious about. That is definitely not armored fish plate, but I'm not entirely sure what this is. But let's move on to the main event over here. Here's our armored fish plate. Now, just like in the quarry a moment ago, it's dried out. It's not quite as visible as when it was freshly broken, but I will wet it in a moment. Now, when we talk about armored fish plates, we're really getting into biology, and this is really straying from my expertise quite a bit. In fact, it's straying so much that I didn't recognize it when I found it almost a month ago, and I had to come out and retrieve it, and luckily did find it again. Based on my limited understanding of biology, I would assume that the plates would have connected at the thicker part, which you're seeing at the base, and then thinned out towards the edge of the plate. And this appears to be two separate plates to me that have landed together. Now, I'm not 100% sure on that, but it looks like if they do connect to the fish where it's thickest, they appear to be separated in that region. So this may be two plates together. Here it is dampened. I'm really smashing this up against the camera because I'm trying to show off the texture on this. Now, what species of fish did it come from? We know that it came from an armored fish, a placoderm. The most famous placoderm at Rockport is Prototanicthus rockportensis. And yes, I did have to practice saying that about 11 times before it came out correctly. This is a species that was discovered at Rockport and is named after Rockport. However, Prototanicthus rockportensis fish plates are, by my understanding, either all or very mostly extremely lumpy. And this is not. This has got some lines on it. And that suggests to me that this may be a holomena. Now, if you're going to ask me what the difference between these species is, I don't really know that. I do know that holomena fish plates tend to be characterized by parallel ornamental lines, whereas fish plates for Prototanicthus rockportensis are extremely bumpy. So I'm going to lean towards holomena, but a paleontologist who specializes in vertebrate paleontology is going to be far more qualified to answer questions about that than I am. I'm going to hammer on the shale that produced that piece a little bit more. I'm going to show you the process, and hopefully we find some more cool stuff. So breaking shale like this is a better job for a crack hammer and chisel than it is for a rock hammer. Rock hammer, you're not going to be able to pry up these thin layers as well as you will with the crack hammer chisel combo. And today I did remember my knee pads. Thank God. I think the wife found them last night because they've been lost for weeks. All right, so we're not going to just randomly pound into this. That's going to create 10 times more work for 10 times worse effort. What you want to be doing is prying layers apart. And honestly, if it's friable enough, you might not even need the crack hammer. You might be able to just wedge it in and pull some stuff up. But I'm interested in getting down into it a little bit. So I'm going to exploit the pre-existing cracks in here. And as little pieces come up, I'll inspect them. But what I'm most excited about are the big sheets that come up. This one's not coming off quite as cleanly as I'd hoped. But here we go. And this one here, we don't have much. We just have a bit of crinoid. Honestly, very little else. Although there is some fracture here. Looks like we got maybe a cladopora fossil in there. But yeah, not much. You're not going to find stuff on every strike. That little bit I got up has got a bit of horn coral there, and also a brachiopod from the inside. Look at all that beautiful nacre in there, that mother of pearl. That's actually really beautiful. I'm going to keep that as a great example of the nacre. I want to say just a few words about the nacre that we find in some of these fossils out here. It's really remarkable. Nacre is the mother of pearl material that lines the inside of the shells of brachiopods and bivalves. We find it lining the shells of animals alive today, and obviously it lined the shells of animals alive during the Devonian. And it's amazing to me that that nacre is still preserved. It hasn't converted to stone or anything else. It is still in there as it was when the animal was alive. How cool is that? But I'm not looking for corals. I'm not looking for brachiopods. I want those armored fish plates, dang it. So let's keep going. I want to get a bigger sheet off. There we go. Don't want it fracturing so dramatically, because if there is anything good, I'd like it to be pretty well intact. Let's see. Hopefully you can see why I recommend always getting a chisel with the hand guard. One missed strike with the rock hammer and you've ruined your month, your year. All right, what have we got in here? We got some brachiopod knacker. Bit of fossil soup, but not the interesting fossils I'm looking for. But how about this guy here? We got brachiopod knacker, shell fragments, crinoids, and a very pretty cladophora here. It's broken in a very pretty way, but I'm not going to take that. I've also been alerted by my paleontologist friend to keep an eye out for shark teeth, but they're very primitive sharks, very early sharks in the Devonian, and the teeth are only going to be a couple of millimeters in size. I don't know if I'm going to find that. I'm going to look for anything that looks vaguely like that, but boy, I'd say the odds of my finding something that small, requiring specialized paleontological knowledge and the ability to recognize stuff like that, but we'll see what we can find out here, huh? I found a bullseye. I'm not sure what I'm looking at here on this one. Is it the inside of a shell? Have I just taken a slice through it? I don't know. I'm so freaked out by the fact that I keep leaving awesome stuff behind. I might take that just to be on the safe side. Yeah, this is a real oddball. So on the one side we have a nice little brachiopod, but here we have a donut. What is this? That's not a crinoid stem. They didn't get that big to my knowledge, or maybe they did. Maybe this is just the biggest crinoid stem I've ever found by a mile, but it is not screaming crinoid at me. I don't know for sure what this is. It is a little bit too circular to look like a typical shell fossil that might have been filled with material on the inside. It's an odd looking little donut. Let's work that a little bit more. I see a sheet that I hope will come up relatively intact. Oh, let's see, there you go. I would have lost the thumb there. Here. Nope. All right. Well, I'll try to find some cool stuff off camera. Well, I found a very small piece of shale out here, but it was friable. So I thought, well, that one will be a bit easier to work the layers on. Now, I haven't found anything amazing, but I have found some very nice little things. So let me show you that. Firstly, there's lots of cool things all around. For example, Got some nice stromatoporoid over here. And then lots of little fossil bits here, corals and such. We've got a fossil soup that's just loaded with cladopora fossils. Don't believe those are bryozoans, although it's kind of borderline, but I believe that's cladopora. The piece I'm working here is a very small one. It's just this block right here. You know, they don't have to be massive to be productive. Let's have a look at some of the little things I found here. Now this piece here showcases some very nice bryozoan fragments. That is a fan bryozoan right there. These are definitely bryozoans. In case you can't tell the scale, that's my thumb. So you can see the zoatia on this guy on the right. Teeny tiny little pinprick holes. I discussed the difference between zoatia and corallites in a previous Rockport video, but not every viewer watches every video of mine. So here's the short version. Zoatia are the teeny tiny holes that the bryozoan individual organisms lived in. The coral equivalent of that is a corallite. They are larger holes that coral polyps individually live in. Zoatia are distinguishable from corallites mostly through size. The zoatia on a bryozoan are going to be smaller than 1 millimeter in diameter, and the corallites on a coral are going to be larger than 1 millimeter in diameter. And that's really the easy way to tell these species apart. Over here, we've got a cladopora fossil, but it's been partially replaced by pyrite. That pyrite rusted away, but it kind of looks like iron threads running through there, doesn't it? Now this is a cool one. And I don't usually find these out here. Look at that. I'll bring this one home with me. What's going on with that? What's the deal with all those little circles? Those aren't crinoid stems. They don't look like crinoids. There's too much empty space inside them. They're just little rings. Well, that reveals it right there. You see that organ pipe look to it? It's often referred to as organ pipe coral. This is syringopora. Syringopora fossils are common, kind of. Well, they span a pretty broad range of time, you know, whereas the Petoskey hexagonaria corals were only around for a very short period in the Devonian, and kind of the same for the Charlevoix stone Favicites corals. Syringopora corals, these organ pipe corals, covered, you know, a couple 100 million years. That said, across the Great Lakes, even though they can be found pretty much everywhere, they're actually not that common. They were not a very widespread species, at least based on their preservation. They were around everywhere, but you weren't getting enormous, massive colonies of them. You tend to find these much less frequently than you would find Petoskey's and Charlevoix stones. What I really love about these guys is that they seem to be trying to have their cake and eat it too. They're trying to get the best of both worlds. They're trying to be a colonial coral and a standalone coral. They have characteristics that look a lot like a horn coral, where each individual polyp builds its own individual pipe, but they're close to their neighbors, just like a colonial coral, but not too close. There's still gaps in between them. So they're almost like colonial horn corals. They're neighbors that like to be near each other, but not too close. You know, if the horn corals are the homesteaders who want to be nowhere near their neighbors, and your colonial corals like Hexagonaria and Favicites are your city dwellers who are packed tightly into apartments. Your Syringopora, they're your folks who live in the suburbs. They like having neighbors, but let's have a nice little yard in between us. I'm going to take that home with me. How about this big guy here? What did I save you for? Oh, you can see those nice fan bryozoans in here again. Look at that. Now you can't see the zoatia on that, but you can see are the empty holes through which water would have passed. That lattice work there. The zoatia are just teeny tiny, imperceptible at this scale on there. Down here, we've got maybe correlates poking through, I'm not sure. Over here, I think I just saved this piece to highlight something a little bit weird that I'm seeing in these rocks. There's some pieces that have all this bluish gray material running through it, and I just don't know what to make of that. If that's any kind of fossiliferous material, I hope a paleontologist will weigh in and tell me. But it doesn't look like it to me. But as history has shown, something not looking like a fossil to me doesn't necessarily mean it's not a fossil. All right, well, here's the deal. I've found a few nice things, but considering I've been pounding rocks for an hour and a half here, I haven't found as much as I was hoping for. I'm gonna do a little bit more. I'm gonna find some more shale out here in a different spot. Not that the location really matters much. It's a quarry. It's all been blasted out and mixed around. But it's almost noon. And we're supposed to be having thunderstorms roll in around 1 o'clock. And, oh, that's kind of pretty. Hold on. I just thought that was a very pretty little stromatoporoid section with the growth rings visible. I always like to stop and look at those. But as I was saying, thunderstorms. And besides the fact that I am just so sweet, I'm made out of sugar and might just melt in the rain. Swinging a rock hammer, a crack hammer, metal tools in general, when there's lightning around, not a good idea. So, I will be calling it quits pretty soon. I haven't heard any thunder yet. I'm not getting wet. So, let's try one more spot. What I'm looking for out here is the biggest hunk of shale that looks like it would come apart very easily that I can find. Is that going to be this guy? Now, the cues I'm going to share with you here probably aren't universal, but they hold true here and probably elsewhere in the Michigan Basin. If you're looking for a real friable shale, you're not going to be looking for a shale that has a lot of cladopora chunks all sticking out of it. Now, this is a very shaly looking piece. I mean, look at all that black friable layering up there, but you see all those coral pieces in there? This means it was very close to some coral reefs. And while that doesn't mean anything at all in terms of whether or not you'll find trilobites or fish plates, what it does mean is that it's probably going to be a little bit more calcareous, and that means it's going to be harder. Those friable layers aren't going to come apart quite so easily. So you're really going to be looking for a piece of shale that is not loaded with tons of horn coral and cladopora and other coral pieces. I see a big hunk of shale over here, but I also see big chunky bits all over it, which makes me worry that this is another piece of coral rich shale, which might be a little bit hard to pull apart. No, those chunky bits are pieces of rock that have been left behind. This might be exactly what we're looking for here. So let me hammer a bit and get back to you. All right, well, this one ended up being exactly the kind of piece I was worried about. I just got done saying, well, it's not loaded with corals. And then there we go. And then you walk around the backside and you find a giant hunk of Hexagonaria Petoskey stone coral. So, okay, it's definitely loaded with corals. But I did get a little bit off. Not that there's anything interesting on the underside, but you see it's loaded with these crinoid stem segments, broken crinoid stems, intact crinoid stems. Over here we have a beautiful fan bryozoan. I've tried to identify this bryozoan, but can't. But the more I stare at it, the more I wonder whether maybe it's not a fan bryozoan. Maybe it's not a fan structure at all. Maybe we're looking at the base of a branching structure rather than holes in a fan that the water passed through. Maybe are we looking at corallites and a cladopora? And just near it, we have some cladopora. Now, there's better examples of cladopora still in the rock here. A little bit right over there, but the really nice stuff is over here. It looks like we got some horn coral right here maybe. But then cladopora, and look at that, you can still see the branching on that cladopora. Isn't that awesome? You can see it come out right there. It's broken. Who knows how far it would have gone. It comes up, and that's probably part of the same segment here. And this comes out like so. Here's a broken piece. You can see why the broken pieces look so beautiful when they're polished. Look at the way the corallites stem from the center and reach out to the edges, kind of like a flower of some sort. This rock was disappointing because it didn't come apart the way I wanted it to. But that said, this is a very nice big rock here. There's our hexagonaria from the side. And over here, we have a favosites coral. The corallites on the favosites are a little bit bigger than they are for the cladopora. And the cladopora tend to be branching, although I don't think that's universally the case. Whereas favosites tends to be kind of a clump, kind of a mass like you're used to thinking of in terms of coral reefs. All right, well, I've been walking towards this guy because I could see the layering on it, but why is this a bad candidate? Well, this is not shale. It's layered, but it's layered limestone. And why is it layered? Well, that's the stromatoporoid reef building layers in there. So yeah, that ain't gonna be what we're looking for. We're not gonna find trilobites and armored fish plates between layers of stromatoporoid reef. All right, this over here, this might be what we're looking for. Am I getting several for the price of one over here? This looks like a very shaly guy right here. This one, he's got fossil chunks in him. That's in fact stromatoporoid layering in there, so we don't want that. But this guy right here is definitely a shale. And we might have a couple more shales just over there. I guess set my bag down here and hunt a bunch of these guys. So I'll do that, and I'll let you know if I find anything awesome. And in the meantime, have a look at those beautiful cladoporas there. Okay, this is fun, and this is why working between the layers of shale can be so productive. Because I was able to exploit the weak zone in this. As you can see here, I might be able to get this whole thing up. So let's see if I can. All right, the whole top is moving now. So let's see, is there a way to zoom out on this? There we go. That's maximum zoomed out. Let's see what we can do. All right. See if I can flip this over without bashing it into my shins. All right. Did we uncover anything amazing? Well, you're working with dramatically improved odds when you get a big piece like this. Zoom back in. There we are. What do we got? Well, we got some cladoporas. We got, appears to be a lot of nothing. There's something right here, but I can identify that. There's some shell fossil, more cladopora. So overall, this was a disappointing piece, and the corresponding side here might have a lot on it, but I'm going to have to huff and puff and try to blow as much of that stuff off to see anything. And honestly, I don't think there's going to be anything here. So I think this one was a bust, but it was a good opportunity to show you the value of working between the layers with the chisel and exploiting those weak zones. The shock waves that chisel puts through the rock actually do more work than the point of the chisel chipping away at the rock itself. We opened up that weak zone and were able to pull quite a lot of fresh rock surface up. It just so happened that it didn't pay off this time. Well, I just did the exact same thing as that, but on a much larger scale over here. So let's have a look at whether it's paid off here. And by the way, in case you're wondering, was that right hand piece heavy? Yeah, I think my back's gonna hurt tomorrow. Anything larger than that, I think we need some machinery out here. But so far, it's not looking very promising here. I take my bag off. I'm not seeing a whole lot in these surfaces here. Are you? See little bits of coral, horn coral and cladopora. Yeah. But look at this, there's a lot of friable layers here. We can pull these up and have a look at what's underneath those. So I will be doing that shortly. I wonder what's that? That's probably a piece of coral. I'm not seeing anything promising in that. But there are a lot of layers here that we can pull up and have a look around. And of course, there's the corresponding piece over here, which is even bigger. And I'll make this my last piece of the day. Oh, but before I sign off, let's just look at these pretty pieces of coral upside down in this one. There we go. What kind of coral are those? Well, I'm not entirely sure. In fact, they could be stromatoporoid. They could be stromatoporoid, but just very poorly preserved. No. Nope. Look at that. So those are corallite walls. So this is definitely coral. But the internal structure just isn't preserved in a way that allows me to ID these. Over here we have a very iron-rich piece. The carbonaceous material that fossilized became an anchor point for iron, and attracted tons of iron to this piece that probably turned into beautiful pyrite and then rusted out when it approached the surface or when it was quarried and exposed to the air. There's another piece of the same thing here. Might have come off the same piece. But yeah, you can see in the center of all this iron here, there is fossil material of some sort. Maybe partially replaced with marcasite. Oh, and now I've got orange rusty fingers. Well, I've been wandering around a bit all over the quarry, and honestly, I'm not having the greatest luck out here, but I have found a little bit of stuff. Got some little plates of some kind down here. I'm real curious about what's going on with this guy and some other similar ones. This guy I want to get a closer look at later. And this guy's got another one of these plates. Is that bryozoan? Is it something else? And then up here, very faintly, a little bit of trilobite. But I'm really not finding anything to make my drive up here worthwhile other than picking up the armored fish plate I left behind last time. All right, this is not what I'm looking for, but it is pretty amazing, I think. And I'm worried it'll become harder to see if it dries out. Although if it rains, that won't be a problem. But look at the level of detail in this. I have no idea what that is, but I believe that is plant. Now, is that above water plant? No. This is all beneath the surface. Ooh, ouch. Got some biting flies arriving out here. Look at that. Look at the detail preserved in that. That is definitely coming home with me. I did not bring this piece home and it broke my heart. I put it next to my bag to gently put in on top of everything else so it wouldn't get crushed under all the other equipment that I put into it. And I packed up my bag and walked out of Rockport and only discovered after returning home it was not in my bag. And unlike that fish plate, this is a very small fossil that is kind of faint. You only see it when you squint at it when you're looking at the rocks. And it wasn't in the same place that I found the fish plate. I'm not going to be able to navigate to the exact same spot. So the odds of my ever coming back and finding it are virtually nil. So thank God I got some great video of this. Let's talk about this. I was kind of panic-stricken when I realized I'd left it behind because I am not familiar with this species. And I was wondering, geez, did I find something new? Is this something that hasn't been described here before or described in the Devonian? This seems to be an undersea plant of some kind. And so I had an emergency conversation with my friend who's a paleontologist running that museum. And I was real frantic. I said, please, for the love of God, tell me that this isn't something new, that leaving it behind isn't a loss to science of some sort. And he came back to me after looking at it a bit and suggested, this is Reptaria stolonifera. Now, what is Reptaria stolonifera? That is not a species I'm familiar with. Well, it is a described species, so no, I didn't discover something brand new. And no, it is not an underwater plant. It is not a bryozoan. It is not a coral. So what is Reptaria stolonifera? Well, it is a heterolid. Well, what is a heterolid? A heterolid is a class of branching phoronids. And if you're like me, you're going to be Googling, What is a phoronid? A phoronid is basically a type of tube worm. It is not a tube worm, although they're sometimes called horseshoe worms, but it lives a lifestyle that to those of us who aren't biologists seems a lot like a tube worm. They are worm-like organisms that build tubes and sometimes live colonially. They are still alive today, not this guy, but these phoronids in general, and they can form colonies up to 100,000 in just an area of a few square meters. They can really pack in tightly. This is a delicate branching structure that this species, Reptaria stolonifera, used to make. Now, to my knowledge, there is scientific merit in finding this here because I don't believe that this species has ever been found at Rockport or in the Rockport quarry limestone. And so we can probably expand our knowledge about Reptaria stolonifera just a little bit. Now I want to share with you how you can squint at this and realize that it's not a plant as I suggested, but rather a series of tubes that branch off from a central stalk that these animals lived in. When you take a close look at these little frond-like structures that are coming off the sides, you'll notice they come in parallel pairs. They start narrow at the bottom and flare out a little bit, so not truly parallel, but mostly parallel. And what you're seeing is a lower tube wall and an upper tube wall, and this is repeated throughout the structure. So yeah, what you're seeing is a branching structure for a colonial worm-like organism that built tubes coming off of a central stalk. Very odd, really interesting. Really wish I had it with me at home, but it's out there. Maybe I'll find it on a future trip. I'm not going to frantically drive up today, but pretty cool. And apparently something you can find in the shales out here. You know, I wonder if I've been doing this wrong. I've been focusing on the muddiest shales because they split apart the most easily. But I am just not finding much at all in these. So I thought to myself, well, do I need to try working on a calcareous shale, one of those shales that are loaded with corals that are so hard to break apart? Am I going to be wasting my time? I took 3 whacks over here and then looked, and right there's a little trilobite just sticking out. So yeah, I'd say I've been barking up the wrong tree. I've been hammering on the easiest rocks to break apart, but the least productive. So I'm going to give myself another half hour here, hoping that the storms stay away. And let's see if I can find something in here. All right, well, I'm done now. After another 30 minutes of pounding on that rock and several other rocks nearby, let me show you all of the treasures I found. But were you under the impression that every rock I hit is loaded with hundreds of the most precious gems and rarest fossils? That is not the case. Gotta say, I'm a little bit disappointed about today. I did succeed in finding the armored fish plate I left behind. However, I was thinking to myself on the drive out here, geez, I only spent about 20 minutes hitting those rocks and I found a trilobite and a fish plate. I'm going to spend a couple of hours out here today. I'm going to find 14 fish plates and 11 trilobites. Well, that didn't happen, did it? But that's how but that's how the casinos get you, isn't it? You know, you walk into the casino and play the penny slot and win 10 bucks. You're like, ooh, this is easy and fun. I don't know why people think it's so hard. And before you know it, it's a different week. You have no money left in your bank account. You got no family left. And you're sitting at the craps table thinking, geez, I thought this was supposed to be easy. Well, you know, why did I find those pieces so quickly last time? Whether or not I recognized them. Why did that kid at my class that I was teaching out here find one when he was just sitting in one spot all day looking at a single rock? Why do some people win the lottery and I don't? right? It's a matter of luck largely. Yes, you've got to be looking in the right places. You're not going to win the Powerball if you're playing, poker. You got to be looking in the right places to find these things, but there's also a very strong element of luck, especially when you're cracking open rocks and just hoping to find something cool inside. I did, however, find some cool stuff. I'm realizing I should look at where I'm going here, because I might not be going towards the exit. I did find some cool stuff though, didn't I? I mean, we found some syringopora coral. We found what might be some sort of a submarine plant. I'm really going to follow that up and try to figure out what the heck that is. So we found some cool stuff. And who knows, maybe that random single find was going to be something rarer than any armored fish plate. You just don't know. Or as a paleontologist would know, I just don't know. There's such a strong element of luck when you're cracking open rocks and looking inside of them. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this journey with me today as I stagger along these rocks. I will say I'm exhausted swinging a crack hammer for more than a couple of hours. It takes it out of you. It's quite the workout. Who needs CrossFit, right? Well, thank you for joining me. I hope you'll join me next time. Until then, I'll see you out there.